All right, welcome to the podcast. This is John McCanian, VP at Dunkirk Realty, a commercial real estate investment firm based on Long Island. I'm joined today by Steve DeRazio, a VP at Colliers' Long Island office. Steve and his team have been involved in tons of corporate transactions on Long Island, as well as some of the more exciting multifamily development projects around here. I wanted to bring in Steve to talk about what he's seeing out there. Let's kick it off. Steve, how did you get started working in real estate?
Yeah. Hi, John. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time and the opportunity. So my story is not as dissimilar as maybe some other people. Coming out of college, I thought I wanted to be in the stock market. So, studying for my Series 7 and just kind of going down that path, which was a lot of phone calls, hey, want to buy stock? No. Want to buy stock? No. Want to buy stock? No. So that was most of my day, just a lot of dialing for dollars, basically. And I got sick of it pretty quickly. I would say within about a year, I was sitting down to dinner with my parents, and my father knew that I was considering a change of careers. And he had been the architect, the lead architect for back when RXR was Rexon. He had been the lead architect there for 20 some odd years at the time, and said, listen, have you ever considered commercial real estate? And I didn't really know much about it. I had said, no, you mean like selling houses and whatnot? And he said, no, well, it's more like office buildings, industrial properties, retail shopping centers, things like that. And I said, well, tell me more. He said, well, I'll do you one better. I'm going to put you in touch with one of my contacts, a gentleman by the name of Dom D'Angelo. A lot of the real estate folks around the island will recognize that name. Dom's sort of a legend. Put me in touch with Dom, and he said, I'm gonna have you sit down with him for a breakfast, and he can kind of run you through all of it. So that's what we did. We met at Woodbury Diner and had about a 2-hour conversation with this guy who, tan as you could possibly be. Looks like he just came back from the Caribbean, and crystal clear snow white hair. And it was a really good convo. We just went back and forth a little bit about what the industry entails, and I think he tried to scare me a little bit away from it. Just kind of giving me the facts about listen, you're not gonna. It's going to take a long time for you to really get established. You're not going to see real money for the first couple of years, and you have to build a book of business and just kind of really being straightforward and honest with me about what the business entails when you're getting started. Didn't scare me, and I actually kind of took sort of a liking to Dom and to what he described as what the process was. I felt that was sort of in line with me and with what I like to do. Plus, it didn't keep me behind a desk all day. It was very much an active being out in the field and meeting with people and discussing the local markets that I grew up in. So he said after that breakfast, he said, "Listen, I'm going to put you in touch with our CEO at the time. That was Herb Agan with Sutton and Edwards." And you're going to go talk to Herb, and he'll see if he wants to hire you. So went and talked to Herb, had a 15-minute conversation. That we hit it off pretty well as well. And by the time that was over, he said, "Listen, if you want to start here, you're going to start in 2 weeks, and you'll be doing. You're a Suffolk guy. You grew up in Suffolk County, so you're going to be starting doing office space in Suffolk County because we have sort of a gap there that we need to fill." My statement back to him was, "Listen, can I start tomorrow?" I really kind of enjoyed what I was hearing. So just hit the ground running and started in a market that I was familiar with. I grew up in the St. James area, so I knew went to Smithtown High School. I knew that area. So I got started between there and sort of worked my way out in concentric circles until 20 years later, I'm sitting here talking to you. So, like I said, not such a dissimilar start from, I'm sure, a number of guys, knowing somebody in the industry. But that's my beginnings here.
Awesome. Yeah, the Sutton Edwards legacy brand seems to have spawned a lot of the active real estate brokers and players today. A lot of people are still working at Colliers. Fast forward decades later, you're now working on some of the most exciting projects throughout Long Island. Everyone knows that there's a lack of multifamily product around here. And, there's some really exciting projects that are kind of driving the economy forward. So let's start talking about some of those. So obviously Station Yards in Ronkonkoma, TriTech. We've come across the TriTech guys over the years. They're all stand-up great guys, got a great reputation.
Fantastic company. I really enjoyed working for them quite a bit.
Yeah, amazing. So why don't you give an overview on that project, kind of where it is today, what you kind of see coming down the pike, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so it's Station Yards is sort of the 800-pound gorilla for multifamily or TOD oriented development right now on Long Island. It's the most ambitious. It's the largest and most ambitious mixed-use development on the island within the last 50 or so years. And it's right on top of the second most popular train station on Long Island. So that connectivity to Manhattan is really key. Total scope of the project is going to encompass about 53 acres, give or take. So it's a pretty large scale development. It's going to be about 1,450 apartment units when it's complete, 360,000 square feet of additional commercial space, office and medical, and then an additional 195,000 square feet of retail. We're coming out of the ground right now with phase 2A. Which is well underway as far as its development is concerned. Myself and my team are in the process of getting the 70 or so thousand square feet worth of retail space on the ground floor leased out. Towards the end of this year, we'll be beginning construction on phase 2B, which is sort of the fourth wall of that U-shaped development for 2A. With the remaining phases 3, 4, and 5 will be coming down the line in later years.
Awesome. Out of curiosity, what types of retail tenancy are you seeing interest in that site? Is it, broadly speaking, is it food companies? What's the flavor?
Sure. So we've had a pretty healthy mix so far. I would say at the moment we've been a little bit skewed towards more food and beverage interest than anything else. But in these newer developments, that tends to be the first interest that comes in. We have, we've had interest from financial institutions. We've had interests from urgent cares. We've had interest from boutique shops and that sort of mix. So it's been an interesting sort of mix to kind of go from one use to the other and work our way through the sort of the modalities of what comes along with each separate business that wants to come in there, because a lot of them very similar as far as food and beverage, but different food and beverage providers will require different setups, which then focuses into grease trap capacity and parking requirements and pickup drop off for loading. So it's a lot of the same, quote unquote, a lot of the same, but each one of those sames is very different in and of itself, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, that does make sense.
It's been an interesting project to sort of work our way through. Really, really enjoying it.
Yeah, one would think that with that many units, it's almost a gold mine for a retailer to service that audience, right? People are going to want to be able to walk, downstairs and pick up some food right?
Yeah, absolutely. Connectivity and accessibility are a really key component of the station yards development. TriTech has gone to extensive lengths to create sort of a sense of place there and community. It's a downtown area that was relatively underserviced from that standpoint. I would say their Patchogue development is sort of the barometer for how these multifamily and TOD mixed use developments, what they can do for a community in and of itself. That was give or take $125 million development project. Now I'm guessing, but I'm assuming that's around where it landed. That brought in about $1 billion worth of economic development to the local community, between the additional development that went up around it, between the businesses that came into town, the new restaurants, the shops. They implemented Alive at 5 now, which it had brought in people from all over the island to an area that never really had sort of its own identity, and now it has sort of come into its own. Blue Point Brewery expanded down there. There's the health system that's down there has grown quite a bit as well. It's been sort of interesting to see the evolution of what that one development did to Patchogue. This, by comparison, Station Yards is $1 billion upfront investment. So you can only imagine if 100 to 125 million turned into $1 billion of economic development down there. You can only imagine what this is going to do for what, again, was a relatively underserviced area before TriTech came in and sort of implemented their plan down there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And let's kind of hone in more on Patchogue. The mayor there, I think most people would agree, has done a really great job of attracting that investment and kind of making it an economic friendly type of area. What is it about kind of his policies, and why do you think that more mayors on Long Island, or what can they do to kind of attract that investment? Is it, more the politics of the local area? Like, what's unique about Patchogue and how they expand that in other parts of the area?
Sure. So, yeah, it all started with Mayor Pontieri. I have to commend the man for really being a visionary outside of what I think a lot of local political personalities were capable or willing to do at the time. It's a scary endeavor. I've got to imagine. I'm not much of a politics guy, but it's got to be a scary endeavor to sort of go against the flow of the tide from the local community and from
Hmm.
the civics when you're implementing a brand new downtown development that is particularly focused around multifamily with additional retail space. The biggest problem that we've all heard, but nobody really has, or at least prior to him, had taken a step to address was that Long Islanders, we like our identity. We like being Long Islanders. We don't want the island. And again, when I say we, I mean the global we. The general thought process is that we don't want the island to become a Queens or a Manhattan or have that kind of density.
Yep.
And you hear all sorts of pushback from the civic associations and from the local residents. Anytime a development pops up on Long Island that's not either a 55 and older community or a retail shopping center or shopping mall, you get all this pushback. Oh, it's going to bring additional traffic and it's going to congest the area, and there's a criminal element that may come in, and what is it going to do to the school system as far as taxes and budgets? And so for a politician, just circling back, for a politician to sort of step outside of his or her comfort level and really take an honest view at what that sort of a development can do for a community, not having had that barometer before or that track record before, but to understand the developer's vision and to recognize just how beneficial that can be for their constituency and for their local area. Again, I have to commend the man for his vision and his openness, really. I think that's openness to a plan. He had, I'm sure, received a lot of pushback from many different angles when that project was kicking off, and he pushed right on through it. And to the benefit of his local community, now that project, as I said, has really sort of kicked off a whole new level of identity for the downtown Patchogue area.
Yeah. Actually, on that note, looking into your crystal ball, what other areas of Long Island do you think have the potential to be the kind of, next Patchogue, next Ronkonkoma? I mean, obviously, it requires a kind of massive, investment. It's kind of hard to compare apples to oranges, but do you see any areas, these kind of TOD sites that have that same potential, might be undervalued right now?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the entirety of the concept is based around accessibility. So and mass transit, right? That's principally the TOD. It's transit oriented development for anybody that's not familiar with that acronym. So I think if you can find an area around a train station that may be somewhat underserviced, has the connectivity, and moreover has the ability to, where the developer would have the ability to acquire a large enough parcel to get that scale out of the development that they really need in order to make it successful, I think it can really transform just about any area. Outside of station yards, which is certainly the principal focus for Suffolk County as far as these developments are concerned, in Nassau, the Westbury area just went through sort of a similar zoning revolution with their downtown area around the Post Avenue and Union Avenue corridor, which is right near where the MTA just built a brand new parking garage for the train station right there. And again, to that group, I would say good on you, because they took a somewhat underserviced area. They took a hard look at their zoning code and the use clauses that they had there, and they reached out to a number of these developers to say, listen, we want to sit down with you. We want to have a conversation about how we can sort of bring in this development that we've seen in other areas of the island that's been so successful. So in doing so, they reworked their zoning code to allow for additional density based on a combination of what they felt was appropriate and the sort of boots on the ground advice from what they were hearing from these developers on what they were going to need ultimately to make these projects successful. So I think that for Nassau that can certainly be a focus. I know we had been everybody that has picked up a newspaper in the last 15 years on Long Island has seen information about the former lighthouse project and around Nassau Coliseum. I also think that could be a really fantastic spot for a significantly larger capital investment and one of these, maybe not as transit oriented, but just from an accessibility standpoint, from a centrality standpoint, and the capability for Long Islanders to drive. We all love our cars. I think that could be a really interesting opportunity if they can kind of come to terms on exactly what they need to see constructed in that particular area to make it successful.
Right. That makes sense. And, there's been some pushback, to put it mildly, from, I think, Kathy Hochul has tried to make a focus along the lines of superseding local townships, basically put in the hands of the state to have them determine the density in areas like Long Island, which I think has been challenging. I think most people around here would agree, leave it in the hands of local communities to decide that. But I think we all agree that, we need that younger workforce to be have somewhere to live, right?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, sort of a tightrope to walk when you're talking about implementing or upzoning for density in these downtown areas. Because again, you've got a community that they live on Long Island because they don't want to live in Manhattan. They don't want that urban atmosphere. They want trees. They want birds. They don't want ambulances and sirens going off every other day, and sort of that sort of atmosphere that the city brings versus what a suburban market brings. So I don't necessarily disagree that it should be left in the hands principally of the local communities, but I think the local communities need a little bit better of an education process, and maybe that's where Kathy and some of the other local politicians can help with, is having an honest conversation about what these developments have done for the community, because we have enough of a track record now. We've got I'll just name a few. I mean, you've got Farmingdale, Amityville, Westbury, Glen Cove. We had mentioned the Nassau Hub. Then Suffolk County, you've got Port Jefferson, Smithtown, Bayshore, Ronkonkoma, Patchogue. These are all areas that have seen significant multifamily and mixed-use developments, or are going to be seeing multifamily and mixed-use developments that are above and beyond the density levels that those communities were traditionally made up of. I don't think I can, off the top of my head, I can't name a single one of them that it turned out to be a problem for the local area, at least nowhere near the same level that you would hear from the community on these pushbacks for development. So I think now that we've got, it's not a mystery anymore. Now that we've got this track record of just how beneficial these developments can be for local areas, I think if politicians can help anywhere, it would be to offer some level of education to the local communities on why this is a good thing for the community, not the problems that it can bring up, or which frankly a lot of the time are just irrelevant. They're not realistic. They're not experienced in actuality. But how can this help the local community? How can it bring more businesses in? How can it bring better jobs to the area? How can it bring more affordable living? It's going to increase ratables for the generally for the school districts. And really, how is it going to help keep Long Islanders on Long Island? We've all heard the term the brain drain, right? Every Long Islander is familiar with that at this point. And for those who may be listening that aren't, it's a situation where we're one of the most expensive areas to live in the entire country. Nassau and Suffolk County are two of the highest taxed, some of the highest taxed counties in the entire country. So it makes it very difficult. They're also very expensive from a housing standpoint. So it makes it very difficult for 20-somethings, early 30-somethings to be able to come out of school, get a quality job here on the island, and be able to afford a level of housing that is going to allow them to progress in their own lives with possibly starting a family and growing that way. So those young professionals tend more often than not to pick up and leave the island.
For sure.
Hence the brain drain. Right. So I think, just as an example, out of the 10 or so friends that I would consider myself close with back from high school, I think I've got 2 of them that still live on Long Island. Mm-hmm. The rest are in Florida. They moved to the Carolinas. They moved to one of them moved to Montana. So all markets that are up and coming development markets. but generally speaking, are less expensive to find quality housing and to find an appropriate living situation for what they wanted out of life.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, where I'm from, the North Shore, that whole Roslyn, Jericho, Syosset area, I mean, it wasn't even a consideration
Extremely expensive.
to stay
Extremely
on
expensive.
Long
Yeah.
Island, coming out of school. It was straight to Manhattan, maybe Brooklyn, right?
Well, those areas don't even really have much in the way of rental housing anyway. So even if it wasn't, hey, I want to buy a house, right? You didn't really have any opportunity to lease in those particular markets outside of, maybe a couple of individual, mom and pop type ownerships. There wasn't any sort of real structure there for me when I came out of college and I was looking. I was with my parents until I was 26 and I had saved up enough money to go out and purchase my own place. But that's a similar story to a lot of kids coming right out of school is they have to establish themselves for 5+ years or more just to be able to afford a down payment. And then on top of the down payment, now you have to have enough of a quality job to be able to to sustain all of the other expenses that come with owning a home.
Right.
So,
and broadly speaking, would you say the tenant makeup? I know you're not involved in the residential portion, the leasing of that, I assume.
No, we have advised on it briefly, but the residential portion is not really it's not really my team's focus. We're principally focused on the commercial aspects of the development for Ronkonkoma, between the retail and hopefully advising a little bit further on the office side as that starts to come out of the ground.
Got it. I mean, I assume the bulk is going to be that younger population we're talking about, but beyond that, is it going to be a mix of, I don't know, younger couples? Like what is the broadly speaking demographic breakdown of what these types of new developments are attracting?
Sure. So the Alston is the phase one of that particular development, and it's a little over 500, and I think it's about 580 some odd apartment units. And it ranges. There's a few studios and one bedrooms, but I think the bulk of it is twos and some threes. And it's really it's sort of an eclectic mix from a demographic standpoint as far as the age variation. There are some 55 and older retirees, 65 and older retirees that live there because it's it's convenient, and we have a number of young professionals that work at probably the biggest demographic of younger professionals is the health work at the health systems because it's very centralized to both the Stony Brook area and also down to Southside LIG and Southside Northwell and Good Sam.
Nice.
So, as a matter of fact, for that project on the residential side, match day, where these residents figure out which health system they're going to be appropriated to, that tends to be Tritech's largest residential leasing day. I think they do 50 some odd leases in over the course of a day.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's really fixed it up quite well. But the age range certainly varies. For phase 2A, the residential focus is going to be a little bit more on studios and one bedrooms, at least more so than it was in phase 1. It's also going to be sort of the downtown within the downtown for that development. It's the retail corridor. It's where we're going to have most of the restaurants and some of the service providers and other goods and services there. So we're anticipating, again, a convenience focused tenant for the residential side that isn't going to spend necessarily as much time sitting in their apartment as they are going to be wanting to go down and enjoy the common green and the events that we're going to have programmed for there and partake in some of the food and beverage providers. And so we're anticipating a little bit of a younger crowd for that particular portion of the development. But again, the common factor there is going to be convenience. It's going to be people that are looking for a convenience-based lifestyle. And the fact that the train station is right there and the fact that MacArthur Airport is right there. You've got the accessibility of the Long Island Expressway, which is half a block north. You really have the ability to sort of make your way to any part of the local area that you may want to quickly. On top of that, you also have have a pretty active and vibrant area to stay in if you decide you want to just hang out and go downstairs and have a beer.
Nice. Yeah, I'm also excited to see the kind of force multiplier effects because one would assume for example, all this industrial development that's happening further out east, this is basically creating a new consumer base for them to serve, right? So you're creating a new demand set that I think is going to reverberate through other areas and other asset classes on the real estate side on Long Island.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent it will. I mean, we're an island that is about 20 miles by 120 miles, and we've got 8 million some odd people living here. So you're always going to have a solid base. But the point behind these developments, at least to the extent that I've seen it, is to try to keep locals local, if that makes sense.
Right,
yeah, to keep locals local, and to provide principally a quality housing option that is fun, is vibrant, is active, is accessible, and can enjoy the amenities that we here on Long Island we may not want to live in, but we like to go into the city regularly. So that is an hour away from Ronkonkoma. You hop on the train; it's walking distance to the train. You hop on the train, you're in Manhattan in an hour. It's a direct line. You now have East Side access, which just opened up, and that's connected to the Ronkonkoma line as well. So now you've got all the accessibility and the different, sort of the different items that come along with Grand Central Station as well, which were not directly accessible prior to East Side access. It's been a really gratifying project to work on and to kind of understand and get a little bit more educated on just how beneficial these downtown developments have been for their local communities and how this one, even on a much more grandiose scale, is going to benefit that particular community.
Yeah, for sure. Taking a step back to the investor side for those kind of smaller to mid-market projects, what would you say is the opportunity, if any exists, for potential conversions to multifamily? So, it's interesting. In the Long Island City, we saw industrial converted to multifamily, right? It's hard to see that happening here. I mean, it might happen one day, but
Sure.
it seems like, everyone's kind of talking on a national level about Class C, Class B, B minus offices being converted. Obviously those plumbing issues are well known, but beyond that, do you see opportunities out there for investors who want to maybe work with the townships to convert existing products to multifamily?
Yeah, I certainly do. Adaptive reuse is what you're talking about. And that's been a very large piece of the Long Island development puzzle over the last 5 or so years. From an industrial standpoint, for the first time, we had seen actually office buildings be converted, which was a lesser desirable asset class to industrial and to medical out here. We had seen office buildings be converted to industrial properties now, the ones that had the ceiling height or had the additional land to be able to grow. You guys have done some of those. Medical has done quite a bit of adaptive reuse as well. It's not unheard of anymore for medical to take a look at some of the larger block retail facilities. You had mentioned plumbing. Typically your two biggest factors when you're talking about going from one asset class to the other is going to be, do I have the parking? Especially if you're upping the density of that particular piece of dirt. Do you have the parking to satisfy the local municipality's code requirements? And do you have the wastewater flow capacity to satisfy the Nassau or Suffolk Department of Health? So, and medical, I think, is probably the best example of that because it is in line with retail, but for general office and particularly for industrial, you need a significant amount of additional land. Generally speaking, there are ways that you can work around having that additional land. Pine Barren credits, I think, is what they're called, and other municipal credits that go towards wastewater flow density can be added to a property, can be purchased and added to a property to sort of help with that capacity. But as far as residential to that, I think it would need to be, from what I'm seeing of these developments, it would need to be in an area that does two things. One, provides the developer the level of scale that they're going to need. So it's got to be a large enough parcel, or at least that developer would have to have the ability to assemble enough of those parcels around that piece of dirt that they can get that level of density that makes the project appropriate. And two, they're going to have the ability to now park residents there. You're going to have the ability to have those other items that residential tenants will look for in these multifamily developments. We'll have that accessibility. We'll have that sort of downtown cluster that they can pick up and walk to. Because again, we talked about convenience-based lifestyle. That's what these residents are looking for. If they wanted their privacy, they would go buy, a single-family home somewhere that's, off in the woods or a little bit more remote than being in a downtown corridor. Most of the residential tenants that we're seeing in these complexes are looking for that activity. They're looking for the restaurants. They're looking for the shops. They're looking for the accessibility to the train. All the things that we discussed earlier.
Makes sense. While we're on the subject of those conversions, you mentioned medical. For owners out there who have those kind of Class B, Class C office properties, is there anything that owners can do to position their properties to be attractive to those medical tenants? Or is it really just kind of as they come in, see what TI they're looking for and then build it out per the requirements, right? Is there anything that you can do in advance of that to reposition the asset, or your thoughts on that?
I think just get educated on your asset. I think there are an exceedingly large number of owners out there that don't really comprehend what the capabilities are for the asset that they own. We had talked about parking. We had talked about wastewater flow capacity. Again, two of your biggest hindrances typically towards being able to get these developments off the ground or these adaptive reuse projects off the ground. My advice would be spend a little bit of money up front and have an architect come in, have them provide you with an appropriately measured set of plans for what your existing development is, have them understand where the structural walls are, where the columns are, and and get an updated survey so that you understand the metes and bounds of your property, as well as getting advisement on what the potential setbacks may be municipally. Spend a little bit of money up front, get educated on what you have, and let them advise you on what the potential is. If you want to go towards multifamily, let them tell you what sort of density a developer might be able to achieve from this particular parcel. If you want to go from office to medical, let them advise you on what the municipal wastewater flow capacity requirements are, and if there are any capabilities to sort of to increase that for the property through a Pine Barren credit or a development credit with the local town. So yeah, that would be my advice. Spend a little bit of money up front, understand what you own, and then from that point, you'll have a much better base to decide on how you want to approach either marketing the property to potential developers or to go about a development yourself.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. It almost seems like office buildings are competing against retail for that same medical tenant base. And they're, retail obviously had its challenges as well, but the repositioning of some of these kind of prime retail assets, Simone, for example, has done a really great job of turning some retail sites into medical and just whole different use. Really, really amazing job that they've done. So it's interesting to see how that has played out over time. Have you seen a lot more of those projects on Long Island of kind of prime retail use being converted to medical? Is that what they're looking for in a lot of cases?
Yeah, so it hits a lot of the touch points that the health systems are looking for today. We had discussed, after the financial crisis, the local Long Island health systems began to sort of absorb and see where they could get economies of scale for local medical practices. So in doing so, it created a situation where branding became very important, right? Because now they're either going into markets that the health system wasn't in potentially or previously, and they also started working their way into markets that were not traditionally, even residential markets, let alone a market they were previously in. So I think that for what they're looking to do, it sort of creates a lot of them look to sort of centralize a number of these local practices into one location and provide a certain level of sort of cohabitation amongst the practices that allows for, instead of referring a physician across town where you may lose that patient to a doctor that's closer, now you can refer them across the hall. Mm-hmm. Instead of having 5 separate offices with 5 separate leases and 5 separate receptionists and fax machines and internet lines, now you could bring them all under one roof and provide a much lesser cost overhead by getting them all sort of together. So there was an economies of scale that allowed them to do this, and I think that was attractive to them, while also helping to increase their visibility in these local communities. Retail is probably the most visibly focused aspect of commercial real estate. It's signage, it's branding. That's really what these buildings are originally developed for. It's accessibility. So the ability to have these health systems now visible in these communities on a much more accessible and a much larger scale with that signage capability, I think became very important to them. And in so doing, they started to look into these retail opportunities because they also are somewhat complementary. That was the word I was looking for before. Complementary. They're also somewhat complementary to what their focus is with regard to the capability of that property itself. The retail typically has a higher parking ratio than general office, certainly larger than industrial. So the ability for these health systems to be able to park their staff and then the sort of transitory patient base that are in and out during the day was important. They also generally have more in the way of the wastewater capacity that we had talked about earlier, which medical is that's typically your number one issue when you're talking about medical development is can you get the wastewater flow capacity? Are you on sewers? And if not, if you're on septic, do you have enough land to be able to justify the Suffolk or Nassau Department of Health's requirements? So retail centers, they have these larger parking requirements, which generally means they have larger parcels of land, and they also are more centrally located from an accessibility standpoint to allow for this visibility that that they were seeking now that they're competing in these local markets they weren't previously in.
Got it. And would you say there's a pattern of growth for where the medical development or medical investment or medical tenancy is happening throughout Long Island, or is it kind of sporadic throughout, call it Suffolk County right now?
Yeah, I think it's a large portion of that is competing for a patient base. We had talked about 8 million people on Long Island, so there's certainly enough individuals requiring healthcare to go around. But I think patient capture has become very important for them. So along with that, the ability, if they're going to be centralizing a number of local practices under one roof, you still need to maintain a certain level of visibility in that particular neighborhood. So I think it is driven a little bit more by the sense of, okay, where can we find the ability to combine these groups under one roof that is still going to keep us in this community and is not going to be far enough away from our existing patient base, because these are all existing practices. They're not new practices, new doctors that are just coming out of their residency that are saying, okay, we're going to put 5 of you into this one spot and that's going to be your new location. Most of these practices have been on the island 15, 20, 30 years with physicians commensurate with that with that timeline. So it's very difficult to tell an established physician, listen, we're going to pull you out of this market and put you in a completely separate market. That's not how the medical industry works. They establish themselves in one particular locale, they grow their patient base, and then they expand it out from there. So to tell a physician, listen, we have to take you out of your market is a pretty daunting task. So I think it's more focused on where can we get the visibility for these local practices, and where can we combine these local practices while still keeping them in this market so that they're not going to lose an already established clientele or an already established patient base.
Got it. And let's go back to the conversion component one second, because I find it interesting on the retail side. So, on the street level, kind of mom and pop sites out there, makes sense for a pretty simple medical conversion. I'm curious on the big box stuff. This is a kind of a national issue. It's been a few years now of trying to figure out what the best use of these kind of former big box retailers is. What would you say as far as like successful projects on Long Island where you've seen developers, investors taking former big box spaces and kind of finding interesting uses? I know, for example, Steel Equities has done some really interesting projects with Sears and NYU, I believe.
Yeah,
Beyond that, what have you seen out there?
they've been very, very, very innovative with the asset classes that they've taken over, and have been able to successfully get a significant amount of medical interest in. The Sears building, Smith Haven Mall, is certainly one of them. That sort of kicked off, I think, from a number of different developers, the idea that these larger box retail, even if it was more of a shopping center or a mall type atmosphere, they can still work because they can still get that scale that they need out of that particular project, and it's visible. And it's going to be attractive to the health system because they have the parking and because a lot of them are on sewers and they have that wastewater flow capacity that I've continued to harp on. They've also done it with in Comac. They took the former Forest Labs building on Comac Road and completely reconfigured that. Bought it for that. My understanding is they bought it at a very attractive number, and within a year, they were able to secure Stony Brook University Hospital. They were able to secure Catholic Health Systems in there for the vast majority of that building. Is 400,000 square foot building, and they were able to secure both of those tenants very quickly. And then they backfilled with some additional tenants, Car Business Systems, and a couple of others that they were able to fill in the rest of the space with. Again, centrally located parcels, easily accessible, and the overall functionality of the building, whether it has to be tweaked a little bit, the overall functioning of the location and of the building itself lent itself well to that sort of adaptive reuse development. So, Steel's been one of the premier developers for adaptive reuse projects, specifically geared towards medical on the island.
Yeah, they've been absolutely legendary in this market, and we're all in awe of the projects they've done. So big kudos to them.
Yeah, somebody said everything they touch turns to gold. So
for sure.
It's a good job.
Okay, well, just to wrap it up, one question I like to ask is kind of what you would do differently. You can go back in time. Would you have started in real estate early? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think I could get much earlier in real estate. I think if I could go back in time myself and with a little bit of knowledge on the direction that my life would eventually take, I would say I would probably have had a couple of more conversations with maybe my dad and some of his colleagues with regard to what they do, because he was directly involved in this industry. So the more I could educate myself, I just see that helping me down the line as far as being able to differentiate from any of the other commercial real estate agents that are out there. And differentiation is a big key in being able to acquire new business. You have to, from a client side, being able to trust your real estate agent, being able to get a solid understanding that they have a grasp on the market that they're talking about, and really how to work their way through a transaction is particularly important. Anybody can hold your hand while you're walking through a piece of space. That's not a difficult piece of our business. It's really understanding how to get from A to B, how to get from that initial showing to the closing table or to the lease signing. So in order to do that, you need to be solution oriented, not necessarily problem oriented, because problems are going to arise. You need to sort of be of the mindset that, okay, this is what we have sitting in front of us. How do we get to that solution? How do we solve this problem and then move on to the next one? And it's particularly important for a client to understand that this is a strong suit for their broker, that they understand not only the market, but they understand how to get through that transaction. So I think I would have a few more conversations with my dad on the topic, and maybe some of his colleagues on the topic of what were some of the biggest problems that you faced in your career, or working your way through certain transactions, and how did you solve them? How did you get to that endpoint? Because the more you can understand, and the more creativity that you can put into a situation, or that you can help adapt a situation to, I think only helps to further both yourself and in your professional career, and also helps to further your clients' interests, which at the end of the day, that's really what we're focused on, is helping our clients.
Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks, Steve, for coming in, and see you next time.
Yeah, John, it was a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity, and anytime.